Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
We had my mom go pick up our daughter recently at a friend's house, and I texted her the address, and she drove to the wrong house. She knocked on the door, another grandmother answered. Well, this is no good. This is like two dogs seeing each other through a fence. It's gonna be hard to get them both back inside. So my mom, she goes, is my granddaughter there? And that lady goes, I have 3 grandsons. No solution. Just 2 grandmothers. You have stuff, I have stuff too. They talked for 30 minutes. It's a wrong door. I had to go get my daughter, then find my mom.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, May the 23rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch and rules for retrogrades. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
My fundamental disagreement with all Keynesian and monetarist demand-siders is that you devalue the importance of money's function as a unit of account. In classical economics, which concentrates entirely on production, supply, not consumption, demand, transactors in the exchange economy have more concern with money as a constant accounting unit than as a medium of exchange or store of value. In producing and exchanging across time and space, Keynesians and monetarists automatically downgrade this function of money as they attempt to manipulate the national aggregate economy. Keynesians cannot break the habit of trying to change the terms of trade with other countries by manipulating the value of the accounting unit. What a mess they created. Jude Winniski. As I've gotten older and had to fight harder to control my weight, I've often used a similar analogy to what Winniski uses here, that I cannot manage my weight by adjusting my scale. What we want as free marketeers is indeed money to be a mere unit of account. Sound money leads to a stable medium of exchange where market forces can adjudicate the value of the goods and services transacting, but the accounting unit is reliable.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Someone who feeds on our confusion, our guilt, or need to be kind. And if we don't know how to deal with that kind of person, they will own us. They will own us spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. They will consume us. Liberals manipulate through confusion and guilt. This is not just a tactic. It's their psychological environment. To understand how a liberal maintains power over others, we have to grasp how deeply these two emotional tools are embedded in their interpersonal strategy. It starts subtly. They may gaslight in small ways. We begin to second-guess our minds. This psychological destabilization is powerful. If we no longer trust ourselves, we'll start to rely on them for our interpretation of events. That's the first hook. Once they become the arbiter of what's real and what's not, they become indispensable to our perception of the world, and that's precisely where they want us. Then comes the guilt. A liberal doesn't just want to control our thoughts, they want to control our emotions too. And guilt is the emotional leash they pull hardest. They will frame themselves as victims no matter how much harm they cause. If we stand up for ourselves, we're hurting them. If we walk away, we're abandoning them. They will recount mistakes, real or exaggerated, with theatrical precision. They don't forgive easily, and they never forget, not because they're wounded, but because our guilt is leverage. Guilt becomes a currency of control. They collect it like a debt, and they make sure we feel like we've never paid enough. We didn't call, we didn't help, we didn't listen enough, sacrifice enough, care enough. There's always something. And even when we give everything, they'll find a way to find a twist in the narrative so that our effort somehow becomes another failure. Because as long as we feel guilty, we'll keep trying harder, and trying harder means staying under their influence. This manipulation works so effectively because it preys on our strengths, not our weaknesses. It targets our empathy, our conscientiousness, our desire to be a good person. We don't fall into the liberal trap because we're broken. We fall in because we're decent. That's what makes it so insidious. We're not being beaten into submission. We're being morally maneuvered. And the more moral you are, the more susceptible you may be. The liberal studies our values and weaponizes them. Over time, this creates a devastating internal conflict. On one hand, we feel something is wrong. The interactions don't make sense. We feel small, reactive, and ashamed. On the other hand, we feel responsible for their moods, their struggles, their well-being. We worry that maybe we are the problem. This is the confusion. This is the guilt. And while we're tangled in that emotional web, the liberal tightens the strands with every interaction. We may start to isolate ourselves, not because they tell us to, but because we feel misunderstood or too exhausted to explain what we're going through. The liberal reinforces this by subtly or overtly undermining our other relationships. They don't really care about us, they might say, or they never liked me, implying that our friends or colleagues are enemies of the relationship. We pull back from others, not realizing this is precisely what the liberal wants, to be our sole source of truth, comfort, and validation. When we're in this cycle long enough, we begin to normalize it. We rationalize their behavior. They had a tough childhood. They're under a lot of stress. They didn't mean it. We take on the role of the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who holds everything together, and in doing so, we abandon ourselves. That's the real tragedy. The manipulation doesn't just distort our view of them, it distorts our view of ourselves. We start to believe that we're difficult, selfish, and overly sensitive. We absorb their criticisms as facts, not realizing that these are projections meant to diminish us. Confusion and guilt are not just products of a toxic relationship, they are the design the liberal needs for us to be unsure. Because certainty is the beginning of resistance, they need us guilty. Because self-blame prevents anger, and without anger there is no boundary, there is only surrender. Clarity and boundaries are their kryptonite. Liberals operate best in murky, ambiguous psychological terrain. The more unclear we are about our needs, our values, our limits, the easier we are to manipulate. That's because liberals don't engage with others in good faith. They're not looking for mutual understanding, shared growth, or authentic connection. They're looking for leverage. And ambiguity is leverage. When we lack clarity, they can shape the narrative. When we lack boundaries, they can shape us. One of the first things that the liberal does when forming a relationship is test boundaries, not necessarily in overt ways, but in subtle ones. Ignoring our discomfort, pushing our limits, making small demands that escalate over time. If we concede early, then they learn quickly that our lines can be crossed. The erosion begins there. But if we're clear from the start about what is acceptable, what is not, what we value and what we will never tolerate, It disrupts their ability to dominate the dynamic. They can't manipulate what they can't penetrate. Clarity is powerful because it strips away the illusions they depend on. Liberals create a shifting narrative where they are always the misunderstood hero or the righteous victim. They speak in vagueness, use plausible deniability, and twist language to suit their agenda. They say one thing, mean another, and claim we misheard or misunderstood when confronted. But when we are grounded in clarity, their tactics lose potency. We begin to see the contradictions, we spot the patterns, and most importantly, we stop questioning our own judgment. It's not just about being clear and thoughtful. It's about being clear in communication, saying no without explanation, saying that's not okay without guilt. Clarity and language is a mirror they can't distort. When we state the truth plainly, it leaves no room for manipulation. Liberals depend on our hesitation, our over-explaining, our need to be liked or understood. When we remove all of that and simply stand in our convictions, we create a kind of psychological force field. They feel it and they fear it. Boundaries, likewise, are not walls of hostility. They're lines of integrity. They define where we end and where the liberal begins. Without boundaries, we become open to enmeshment, to being emotionally absorbed into their chaos. With boundaries, we maintain our autonomy, our energy, and our identity. That terrifies them. A liberal doesn't want a partner, friend, or relative. They want a mirror that reflects their idealized image back to them. Boundaries shatter that mirror. They remind the liberals that we are not an extension of them, not a pawn in their story, not a resource to exploit. But asserting boundaries is not easy, especially when the liberal pushes back. And they always push back. They'll call us selfish, cold, distant, uncaring. They'll accuse us of abandoning them, of being too sensitive, too rigid, too difficult. These are not genuine criticisms. They're pressure tactics. They are designed to make us doubt ourselves, to bend our will. But if we've done the inner work, if we've clarified values, emotional limits, and standards for healthy interaction, we'll recognize these reactions for what they are. Desperate attempts to regain control. There's another reason clarity and boundaries are so threatening to liberals. They expose the imbalance in the relationship. The moment we say, this is what I will and will not tolerate, we create a benchmark. And now their behavior can be measured against it. That's dangerous for someone who thrives on chaos and emotional manipulation. They prefer a world where nothing is clear, where everything can be reframed and justified. Boundaries destroy that world. They introduce structure, accountability, and consequence. Clarity just doesn't clarify the liberal, it clarifies us. We begin to see where we've compromised, where we've stayed silent, where we've made excuses for unacceptable behavior. We become aware of the role that we've played in enabling the dynamic. And that awareness is sobering, even painful. But it's also empowering. Because once we're clear on who we are, what we value, and how we deserve to be treated, we stop tolerating what we used to explain away. We stop shrinking ourselves to avoid conflict. We stop accepting confusion as normal. In that light, clarity and boundaries aren't just tools of self-protection. They're acts of self-respect. They say, we matter. They say, reality is valid. They say, you don't get to decide who we are or how we feel. And that assertion of self is the one thing a liberal cannot stand, because their entire psychological survival strategy depends on us staying small, unsure, and compliant. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 39. The retrograde rejects any and all racist, statist, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic perversions of conservatism associated with the alt-right. Alt-right is non-right. It is false conservatism, ideological refuse to be identified, decried, and jettisoned. Intellectually, the alt-right worldview proves to be piffle, falderall, without pedigree. But practically, as a stalking horse in the popular mind for Catholic conservatism, it presents the mortal danger of mistaken identity. The radical news and commentary media will hasten to identify retrogrades as alt-right because they customarily slander all non-moderate, non-tepid opposition parties in this boilerplate fashion. It is the new standard of radical Western journalism to depict any and all parties rejecting one world government and instead espousing national sovereignty as alt-right. Simply put, to be retrograde is to pose a superlative threat to the radical mainstream. We are the one true movement of classical anti-racism and anti-bigotry. Radicals will never be deterred from their calumnious false narrative by hard facts, however. The retrograde worldview insists on patriotism, borders, and turning back the clock for a highly specific reason: love of Christ and his moral code. The alt-right worldview merely apes these sympathies from a tawdry resentment for the Christian teleology which insinuates them. These alt-right rogues can easily be popularly confused for retrogrades because they customarily fight nuclear, like retrogrades. Like that of the retrogrades, alt-right rhetoric lacks the doddering domestic impotence of the mod cons. The alt-right is possessed of some fire in the belly, which makes it stand out amongst moderate mainstream wordplay. But their wicked principles are basically diametrically opposed to ours. The real secret behind the radical rush to characterize alt-right as conservatism inheres in the fact that alt-right is actually nothing more than the anti-globalist alt-left. Both rivals of the retrograde, radicals and alt-right, prove to be materialistic egalitarians who favor mob-rule democratic institutions which reject the timelessness of the immutable natural law and the dignity of the individual. Consider the identical nature of the radical left and the alt-right on the following substantial issues. They both favor centrally planned socialist economy. They both fixate on a determinist view of race and personal identity, whereas the retrograde adopts a position of Thomistic, colorblind individualism. They both harbor a cultural and policy antipathy to Christianity and a longing for a robust and binding surrogate for it. Each side cherishes abortion, population control, and eugenics. Moreover, modern radicalism is often implicitly neo-pagan, whereas the alt-right is explicitly neo-pagan. Consider this passage from an article in Vice. Quote, "There's a war going on in the American pagan community. On one side are racists who see gods like Odin and Thor as an embodiment of the supremacy whites have over the rest of the planet. On the other are the practitioners who believe these gods transcend racial lines and belong to everyone. Recently, the contention between these two groups has reached a tipping point as anti-racist pagans try to claim the narrative around their faith before it is overtaken by alt-right racists. Although the leaders of Nazi Germany were obsessed with paganism and the occult, it has largely been associated with multiculturalism here in the United States." Unquote. Like all paganism, all bigotry, all eugenics, all anti-Christianity, all collectivism, alt-right is to be repudiated wherever the retrograde encounters it, which is practically nowhere except on the internet, given the alt-right's exaggerated yet small presence in American life.
And that was, let's see here, Rule 39 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Mossad.
Colonel Hassan Sayed Kodai pulled his car onto the quiet residential street in southern Tehran. May 22nd, 2022, late afternoon. The sun was still high, but the heat had begun to ease. He was minutes from home after another day at IRGC headquarters, coordinating operations that the world would never know about. Unit 840, external retaliation planning, surveillance of Israeli targets abroad, the kind of work that required absolute secrecy and carried enormous risk. He didn't notice the two motorcycles approaching from different directions. He didn't see the riders exchange a glance as they converged on his vehicle. His car slowed as he prepared to turn into his driveway. That's when the first motorcycle pulled alongside. The rider's hand came up holding a pistol. 5 shots fired through the driver's side window in rapid succession. Kodai's body jerked with each impact. The second motorcycle approached from the other side. 3 more shots, then 2 more. 10 bullets total fired in broad daylight on a residential street in Tehran. Kodai slumped over the steering wheel, blood spreading across his uniform. Dead before his security detail could react. Dead before neighbors could process what they were hearing. The motorcycles accelerated away, weaving through afternoon traffic with practiced precision, and vanished completely into Tehran's sprawling urban landscape. No explosives, no elaborate magnetic bombs, no sophisticated devices, just close-range gunfire executed with flawless timing and immediate escape. Within hours, Iranian authorities sealed the neighborhood. Within days, accusations flew toward Israel. But the operation itself revealed something far more disturbing than who pulled the trigger. It revealed how deeply Israeli intelligence had penetrated Iran's most secure organization, and it demonstrated a new doctrine in the shadow war between Israel and Iran, a doctrine where simplicity beats sophistication, and preemptive strikes replace reactive defense. May 22nd, 2022, and the assassination that changed Iran's security doctrine forever. To understand why Hassan Sayyad Kodai died and why his death mattered strategically, you need to understand who he actually was. And this is where most initial media coverage got it completely wrong. When news of the assassination broke, international media immediately framed it as another nuclear scientist killing. Headlines compared it to Operation Narnia, the campaign that killed Iranian nuclear scientists between 2007 and 2012. Analysts speculated about which nuclear facility Kodai worked at and what weapons research he was conducting. But that framing was entirely incorrect. Hassan Sayyad Kodai had nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a researcher. He wasn't developing centrifuges or working on uranium enrichment. He was something far more operationally significant and far more immediately threatening to Israeli security. He was a senior colonel in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically assigned to the Quds Force, which handles Iran's external military and intelligence operations. And within the Quds Force, Kodai held a particularly sensitive position. He was a coordinator for Unit 840. Unit 840 is not widely discussed in open-source intelligence reporting because Iran maintains strict operational security around its activities. But Western intelligence agencies understand exactly what Unit 840 does. It's the IRGC's External Retaliation and Offensive Operations Cell. While other Quds Force units handle support for proxy forces like Hezbollah and Hamas, Unit 840 focuses on direct action abroad, surveillance of Israeli diplomats, intelligence gathering on Jewish community centers in Europe and South America, planning assassination attempts against Israeli officials traveling overseas, coordinating attacks on dual national business people with Israeli connections, recruiting assets who can conduct operations in countries where Iran doesn't have official presence. This is offensive operations work, not defensive. Unit 840 doesn't build weapons to deter Israeli attacks. It plans attacks to retaliate for Israeli operations, and Hassan Sayyad Kodai was one of its senior planners. Iranian officials described Kodai as a defender of the shrine, which is code language for personnel involved in Iranian operations in Iraq and Syria. This designation provided cover for his real work. Officially, he was coordinating Iranian military advisors supporting Iraqi and Syrian forces against ISIS and other threats. Unofficially, he was planning operations against Israeli targets worldwide. Western intelligence agencies assessed that Kodai was actively involved in coordinating surveillance operations that would enable future assassination attempts. His network extended across multiple countries. He managed assets who conducted reconnaissance on potential targets. He coordinated logistics for operations that might not execute for months or years. And he reported directly to senior Quds Force leadership about operational readiness and target selection. This made him extraordinarily valuable and extraordinarily dangerous, not because of what he'd already done, but because of what he was planning to do. The strategic significance of targeting Kodai represents a fundamental shift in Israeli assassination doctrine. During Operation Narnia, Israel killed nuclear scientists reactively. Iran was building weapons capability, so Israel killed the scientists building those weapons. That's defensive targeting. You remove the people creating an existential threat. But killing Kodai was preemptive offensive targeting. He wasn't building weapons that might threaten Israel years from now. He was planning attacks that might kill Israelis months from now. Maybe he was coordinating surveillance on an Israeli diplomat in Argentina. Maybe he was managing an asset in Turkey who was preparing to plant a car bomb outside an Israeli cultural center. Maybe he was planning an assassination attempt on a former Mossad officer living in Europe. Whatever he was planning, Israeli intelligence decided the threat was imminent enough to justify killing him in broad daylight in Tehran. This represents a doctrine evolution, from killing to prevent future threats to killing to stop imminent operations, from reactive defense to preemptive offense. The question intelligence analysts immediately asked was, how did Mossad identify Kodai as the coordinator of Unit 840? The Quds Force maintains strict compartmentalization. Officers don't advertise their unit assignments. They don't discuss operational responsibilities with anyone outside secure channels. Yet, somehow, Israeli intelligence not only identified Kodai's role, but understood it well enough to assess him as a high-priority target worth the risk of an operation inside Tehran. This suggests penetration of IRGC communications, human intelligence sources within the Quds Force, or both. Someone inside Iran's most elite military organization was providing detailed information to Israel about Unit 840's structure, personnel, and operations. That level of penetration is terrifying from Iran's perspective. If Mossad knew enough about Unit 840 to target its coordinators, what else did they know? How many other officers were compromised? How many operations had been exposed? The assassination itself was just the visible manifestation of a much deeper intelligence breach. What made Kodai's death even more shocking to Iranian security services was the operational security failure it revealed. He was a senior IRGC colonel working in one of the most sensitive units in Iran's military apparatus. He should have been following strict security protocols, varied routines, randomized schedules, unpredictable routes, rotating safe houses, the standard counter-surveillance measures that any intelligence officer operating in hostile environments would employ. Yet he was killed outside his own home in broad daylight. That means his residential address was known. His daily routine was predictable enough to plan an ambush. His schedule was consistent enough that the assassination team knew when he'd be returning home. And his security detail was inadequate or poorly positioned to prevent the attack. Every one of those failures represents a breach of basic operational security. Iranian counterintelligence later conducted internal reviews that reportedly criticized IRGC security protocols and identified multiple officers who had become complacent about their personal security. But those reviews came too late for Kodai. The assassination itself revealed extraordinary operational sophistication despite its tactical simplicity. May 22nd, late afternoon. Kodai drives through Tehran's Motalebi neighborhood toward his residence. Two motorcycles converge on his vehicle from different directions, suggesting coordination and communication between the riders. This isn't random. This is choreographed. The first motorcycle pulls alongside the driver's side. The rider produces a pistol and fires 5 shots through the window at point-blank range. Before Kodai can react, before his security detail can respond, before anyone on the street can process what's happening, he's been hit multiple times. The second motorcycle approaches from the passenger side and fires 3 more shots, then 2 additional shots. 10 bullets total. The overkill is deliberate. They're not taking chances that he might survive. Both motorcycles immediately accelerate away, disappearing into Tehran traffic within seconds. The entire attack from first shot to escape took less than 30 seconds. Witnesses describe the riders as calm and methodical. No panic, no hesitation, just execution and departure. The choice of method tells you as much about the operation as the target selection does. This wasn't a magnetic bomb like the ones used during Operation Narnia to kill nuclear scientists. This wasn't a remote detonated explosive device. This wasn't a sophisticated piece of technology. It was pistols fired at close range by riders on motorcycles. That simplicity was a deliberate strategic choice. Magnetic bombs leave forensic evidence. Explosives contain chemical signatures that can be traced. Complex devices require technical knowledge and specialized components that create supply chain vulnerabilities. But pistols? Pistols are ubiquitous. Bullets can come from anywhere. The forensic trail is minimal, and the simplicity sends a psychological message that's even more powerful than the killing itself. The message is, we don't need sophisticated devices because we have something better. We have intelligence. We know where you live. We know your schedule. We know when you'll be vulnerable. And we can reach you with the most basic weapons because our information is so superior that technology doesn't matter. The motorcycle-based delivery system was tactically brilliant for Tehran's specific environment. Tehran has notoriously congested traffic. Cars can be stuck for minutes or even hours in gridlock. But motorcycles can weave through stopped vehicles, navigate narrow gaps, and maintain mobility even in the worst traffic. This gives the assassination team multiple advantages. They can approach a target vehicle that's stuck in traffic or moving slowly through a residential area. They can execute the attack and immediately escape while other vehicles are still stationary. They make pursuit difficult because cars can't follow them through tight spaces, and they blend into the urban landscape because Tehran has thousands of motorcycles on the roads at any given time. Within minutes of the assassination, those 2 motorcycles were indistinguishable from every other motorcycle in the city. The riders could change clothes, ditch the bikes, switch to cars, and disappear completely. And that's exactly what happened. Despite Tehran's extensive security camera network, despite immediate IRGC response, despite citywide alerts, the assassins were never caught. The timing of the attack, late afternoon rather than morning rush hour, suggests careful operational planning. Morning attacks have the advantage of catching targets during predictable commutes. But they also mean higher traffic density, more witnesses, and more potential complications. Late afternoon provided a sweet spot. Kodai was still following a routine, but traffic had begun to ease, giving the motorcycles better maneuverability. Visibility was good, allowing the shooters to positively identify their target. And the neighborhood was quiet enough that the motorcycle's approach wouldn't be lost in surrounding noise. Every detail of the timing, location, and method reflected sophisticated planning based on detailed surveillance of Kodai's patterns and Tehran's urban environment. But the most operationally significant question is who were the motorcycle riders? This is where the operation reveals its most disturbing implications for Iranian security. There are essentially 3 possibilities, each with different strategic implications. Possibility 1, the riders were Israeli Mossad operatives who infiltrated Iran specifically for this mission. This is the most dramatic scenario, but actually the least likely. Getting Israeli operatives into Iran is difficult. Keeping them there long enough to conduct surveillance and plan the operation is even harder. And exfiltrating them after a high-profile assassination in the capital city would be extraordinarily risky. Possibility 2, the riders were recruited local assets. Iranians who agreed to work for Israeli intelligence. This is more plausible and more common in modern covert operations. Mossad has a long history of recruiting Iranian dissidents, ethnic minorities, and people with financial or personal grievances against the regime. These local assets can operate more naturally in Iranian society, conduct surveillance without raising suspicion, and execute operations with less risk of detection. Possibility 3. The writers were hired contractors from a third country, neither Israeli nor Iranian, who were brought in specifically to pull the trigger while local assets handled logistics and intelligence. Iranian authorities later claimed the shooters were foreign nationals who exited Iran rapidly using pre-positioned escape routes. If true, this suggests a hybrid model where Mossad used disposable contractors for the actual killing while Iranian facilitators provided intelligence, logistics, and support. The contractors would have entered Iran on false documents, possibly through land borders with Azerbaijan, Armenia, or Iraq. They would have been briefed on the target, provided with weapons and motorcycles by local facilitators, given the surveillance intelligence needed to plan the hit, and then extracted through overland routes immediately after the operation. This approach gives Mossad multiple advantages. The shooters themselves are expendable. If they're caught, they can't reveal sensitive information about Mossad operations because they don't have access to it. They were hired for one job, given minimal information, and extracted before they could be rolled up. Meanwhile, the real assets, the local facilitators who provided intelligence, rented safe houses, arranged logistics, and enabled the operation, remain in place for future operations. 3 years after the assassination, we learned more about those facilitators, though how much of what Iran claimed is true remains disputed. In July 2023, Iranian authorities arrested a man named Mohsen Langarneshin. They claimed he was a Mossad operative recruited inside Iran. According to Iranian intelligence services, Langarneshin had been recruited by Mossad in 2020, 2 years before the Kodai assassination. He allegedly met with Mossad agents abroad, possibly in Turkey, or a former Soviet republic where Israeli intelligence operates with relative freedom. During those meetings, he was trained in covert communications, given operational security protocols, and assigned specific tasks. His role, according to Iranian prosecutors, was providing technical, logistical, and operational support for Mossad operations inside Iran. That meant renting safe houses under false names where Mossad operatives or contractors could stay without detection. It meant acquiring equipment like weapons, motorcycles, communications devices, and surveillance gear. It meant conducting pre-operational surveillance on targets, tracking their movements, identifying their routines, and reporting that intelligence back to his handlers. And it meant providing post-operational support like disposing of evidence, helping operatives escape, and maintaining plausible deniability. The specific phrasing Iranian authorities used is revealing. They said Langarneshin provided technical, logistical, and operational support. They did not say he pulled the trigger. They did not say he fired the shots that killed Kodai. The distinction matters because it aligns with how modern intelligence agencies actually structure covert operations. Mossad doesn't send Israeli agents to pull triggers if they can avoid it. That creates unnecessary risk and unnecessary diplomatic exposure if something goes wrong. Instead, they use compartmentalized networks where each person knows only their specific role. Langarneshin, if he was indeed working for Mossad, probably didn't know the shooters' identities. He might have rented a safe house and been told someone would use it for a few days. He might have acquired motorcycles and been told they were needed for transportation. He might have conducted surveillance on Kodai and reported his schedule without knowing that information would be used to plan an assassination. This compartmentalization protects the network. If Iranian counterintelligence arrests one facilitator, that person can't betray the entire operation because they don't know the entire operation. In December 2023, Iran executed 3 men and 1 woman who were also accused of ties to Mossad and involvement in various sabotage and assassination plots. The exact nature of their alleged crimes was never fully disclosed, but Iranian state media described them as part of a spy network that had been operating for years. Then, on April 30th, 2025, Iran executed Mohsen Langarneshin. The official statement from Iran's judiciary said he was a high-ranking spy for Israel's Mossad who provided operational, technical, and logistical support for the killing of Colonel Kodai and other alleged attacks inside Iran. The judiciary claimed Langarneshin had met Mossad agents abroad multiple times, rented safe houses in Tehran, and assisted covert operations over a period of several years. He was tried in Iran's Revolutionary Court, a judicial body that handles national security cases. And that's where the official narrative becomes extremely problematic. Human rights organizations immediately raised concerns about the trial process. Revolutionary court proceedings in Iran are routinely criticized for lack of transparency, denial of due process, and use of confessions obtained under duress. Defendants in national security cases rarely have access to independent legal counsel. Trials are closed to international observers, evidence is not disclosed publicly, and confessions, which form the basis of many convictions, are often extracted through interrogation methods that international human rights law defines as torture. We don't know whether Langarneshin was actually a Mossad asset or whether he was a scapegoat selected by Iranian counterintelligence to demonstrate that they had identified and punished the people responsible for Kodai's death. We don't know whether his confession was genuine or coerced. We don't know whether the evidence against him was real or fabricated. What we do know is that the trial process did not meet international standards for fairness, and the execution served multiple purposes beyond whatever justice or punishment it represented. The timing of the 2025 executions was politically significant. They occurred during a period of intensified regional tensions between Iran and Israel. Iranian military figures were being killed in Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Iranian nuclear facilities were experiencing mysterious explosions and equipment failures. Israeli leaders were making increasingly explicit threats about military action against Iran's nuclear program. In that context, the execution sent multiple messages. To the Iranian public, they demonstrated that the government had identified and punished traitors responsible for killing an IRGC officer. To Iranian intelligence and security services, they showed that counterintelligence was taking action and holding people accountable. To potential Israeli assets inside Iran, they served as a warning about the consequences of collaboration. And to the international community, they reinforced Iran's narrative that Israeli intelligence was conducting illegal operations on Iranian soil. Whether Langarneshin was guilty or innocent, the executions served strategic communication purposes. But here's what the executions also revealed, and this is what Iranian authorities would never publicly acknowledge. The fact that Iran needed to execute facilitators 3 years after the assassination demonstrated that the security breach had been so severe and Iranian counterintelligence had been so compromised that it took years just to identify some of the people involved. If Iranian security services had been competent and effective, they would have rolled up the network immediately after the assassination. They would have arrested the facilitators within days or weeks, not years. The lengthy investigation period suggested that Iranian counterintelligence didn't know who to arrest, didn't have reliable intelligence about Mossad's asset networks, and had to conduct extensive internal investigations that probably swept up innocent people alongside any actual collaborators. And even after executing multiple people, Iranian authorities could not credibly claim that they had eliminated Mossad's penetration of Iranian society. Because if Israeli intelligence had one network, they probably had multiple networks. If they recruited one facilitator, they recruited others. And if they pulled off one successful assassination, they could do it again. Iran's response to the Kodai assassination was telling in what it prioritized. After the attack, Iranian officials issued the usual public statements blaming foreign intelligence services and vowing retaliation. But the actual Iranian response was not focused externally. Iran did not immediately launch retaliatory attacks against Israeli targets abroad. They did not escalate with dramatic terrorist operations against Jewish communities or Israeli embassies. Instead, the Iranian response was overwhelmingly focused inward. Massive internal counterintelligence purges swept through the IRGC. Officers were interrogated about their security protocols, their contacts, their movements. Surveillance was tightened within IRGC units, with security services monitoring their own personnel more intensely than external threats. Renewed paranoia about infiltration consumed institutional energy and resources. Trust eroded between different IRGC factions and between IRGC intelligence and MOIS, Iran's civilian Ministry of Intelligence and Security. Each organization suspected the other of incompetence or possible compromise. And this internal focus revealed something strategic that Mossad had understood when planning the operation. The assassination itself was valuable. Removing Kodai disrupted Unit 840's operations and eliminated a skilled coordinator. But the secondary effects, the paranoia, the internal divisions, the counterintelligence paralysis, those effects were even more valuable than the killing itself. This is the doctrine of making the enemy damage themselves. You don't need to destroy an entire organization if you can make that organization turn inward and consume its own resources hunting for traitors. You don't need to kill dozens of officers if killing one officer triggers purges that remove dozens more through suspicion and paranoia. And you don't need to fight Iran's security services directly if you can make them fight each other. The Kodai assassination was designed to trigger exactly this kind of institutional self-damage, and it worked spectacularly. Unit 840, the external operations cell that Kodai had coordinated, essentially went dark after his death. References to the unit disappeared from Iranian semi-official media. Iranian military statements that had occasionally mentioned Unit 840's role in external operations stopped mentioning it entirely. Some analysts believe the unit was formally dissolved and its personnel reassigned to other Quds Force elements. Others think it was simply renamed and buried deeper in the organizational structure to avoid further targeting. Either way, the effect was the same. Unit 840's operations were disrupted, delayed, or canceled. Officers who had worked in external operations planning requested transfers to less sensitive positions. The institutional knowledge that Kodai represented was lost, and the entire external operations apparatus had to be rebuilt with new personnel, new procedures, and new security protocols. Lesson 2. The real battlefield is counterintelligence. The Kodai assassination caused more damage through Iran's response than through the killing itself. Iran's massive internal purges consumed resources and institutional energy. Trust erosion between security agencies degraded operational effectiveness. Paranoia about infiltration paralyzed decision-making. Officers became afraid to communicate, afraid to collaborate, afraid to take initiative because any action might expose them to suspicion. This is exactly what successful covert operations aim to achieve in modern intelligence warfare. You don't need to destroy the enemy's entire apparatus if you can make them destroy themselves through suspicion and fear. The operation's decisive effects occurred after the attack, not during it. Iranian counterintelligence spent years trying to identify facilitators, conducted investigations that probably ensnared innocent people alongside any guilty parties, and ultimately executed several individuals without ever being certain they eliminated Mossad's networks. The psychological impact of that uncertainty was more damaging than any number of additional assassinations could have been. Lesson 3. Deterrence without escalation. The Kodai assassination was violent but controlled. 10 shots fired at one target. No explosives that might kill bystanders. No dramatic destruction that would generate mass civilian casualties. The operation was designed to send a message while avoiding the kind of dramatic spectacle that would force Iranian leadership to retaliate massively. This is actually a de-escalation tactic disguised as an assassination. By using simple methods, limiting collateral damage, and maintaining strategic ambiguity about responsibility, Israel created space for Iran to absorb the hit without feeling compelled to launch major retaliatory strikes. If Mossad had used a car bomb that killed Kodai plus 10 civilians, Iran would have faced enormous domestic pressure to respond with a spectacular attack. But a targeted shooting with one military casualty, Iran could claim they would investigate, blame foreign intelligence, and focus on internal security without immediately escalating to open conflict. The method chosen actually reduced escalation risk while still achieving the operational objective. Lesson 4. Target selection matters more than method. Killing Kodai wasn't primarily about removing one individual. It was about disrupting Unit 840's network operations. Kodai's role as coordinator meant he possessed institutional knowledge about ongoing operations, asset networks, operational plans, and security protocols. Removing him didn't just eliminate one officer, it broke continuity across multiple operations that he was managing. New coordinators would have to be brought in, briefed on existing operations, introduced to assets, and brought up to speed on security procedures. That process takes months and creates vulnerabilities where operations might be exposed or assets might be lost. The strategic impact of killing one coordinator exceeded the tactical effect of the assassination itself. This is why modern intelligence agencies focus on targeting network nodes rather than hierarchical leadership. Killing a high-profile leader generates headlines, but often doesn't disrupt operations significantly because leadership succession is planned and institutional knowledge is distributed. But killing the coordinator who actually runs operations day to day can paralyze entire networks. The Kodai assassination also revealed the evolution of Israel's targeting doctrine in its shadow war with Iran. During Operation Narnia from 2007 to 2012, Israel killed nuclear scientists. That was reactive defensive targeting. Iran was building weapons capability that posed an existential threat to Israel, so Israel killed the scientists building those weapons. The goal was delaying Iran's nuclear program and buying time for diplomacy and sanctions. With Kodai, the targeting doctrine shifted to preemptive offensive operations. Iran wasn't building a weapon that might be used eventually. Or Unit 840 was planning attacks that might be executed imminently. The threat timeline was compressed. Killing Kodai wasn't about preventing a future threat years away. It was about stopping operations that might occur weeks or months from now. This represents a significant expansion of what Israel considers legitimate targets. Not just people building weapons, but people planning operations. Not just scientists in laboratories, but military coordinators managing networks. The implications are profound because this doctrine could theoretically extend to anyone involved in any aspect of operations Israel considers threatening. The doctrine evolution also reflects tactical adaptation based on Iranian security improvements. After Operation Narnia, Iran dramatically increased security for nuclear scientists. They were moved to secure compounds. They lived on site at facilities. Their movements were randomized and heavily protected. Killing them became operationally difficult and strategically less valuable because Iran had learned to compartmentalize and distribute critical knowledge. But Unit 840 operatives couldn't live in secure compounds. Their job required them to travel, meet with assets, coordinate with foreign contacts, and maintain some degree of normal life. That created operational vulnerabilities that Israeli intelligence could exploit. Kodai lived at a residential address and followed predictable routines because his work required a degree of normalcy that laboratory scientists didn't need. That made him targetable in ways that Iran's nuclear scientists were no longer targetable.
And that was the Mossad. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.